Hey everyone, it's Forrest. Happy New Year and welcome back to another episode of 1000 Seconds. Today I had a chance to sit down with my friend and colleague Stacey Denaux. Stacey is a state and national leader in conversations related to homelessness and affordable housing. I know you're going to love this episode. And I also hope you'll go click around our YouTube page and listen to episodes 1 through 7. We've had some great guests in this first season. This is episode 8 and coming soon episodes 9 and 10. We're going to wrap season 1 in the next couple weeks. And early spring, we'll be on to season 2. But first, let's listen to my conversation with Stacey. Stacey Denaux, hello. How are you? So good to see you. Happy New Year.
Thanks, Forrest. Same to you.
I always carry just a touch of confusion how long I'm allowed to say that. But I think since we haven't crossed paths in person yet, Happy New Year is still appropriate.
I think, and I always welcome someone wishing me something happy.
I've got a little bit of a confession here / question as we get started. You're a little bit of a ghost online, I've got to tell you. I don't know if that's intentional or not.
I like that. Yeah.
Usually just a quick Google search and some sleuthing, I get everything I need about somebody's background, history, education, all the things. I had to actually dig a little harder and call on some friends and colleagues and make sure I had all of the history put together. But here's what I know. Bachelor of Science from the University of South Carolina,
Yep.
Riley Institute Diversity Fellow, some advanced training and certificates in organizational management. I actually didn't know this, but you spent time at the Charleston Chamber of Commerce.
That was really the first phase of my career. Yeah.
Founding director there of the Education Foundation. So we have founding director in background. We have roles like director of advancement in your background. We have your current role as the CEO of 180 Place. You got there in 2004.
Yep.
Organization wasn't called 180 Place at the time, right? We'll get to that in a second.
Yep.
In 2009, you were named Nonprofit Leader of the Year by Trident United Way. What I knew about you without the Google search is you are a national leader in these conversations around homelessness and affordable housing and serve on lots of local, state, national boards and committees. How'd I do? Is that all of
great.
it?
Yeah. It sounds like I haven't been at this for 30 years, but sure. Yeah.
No, it's a lot of really neat stuff. But most importantly, maybe, do you remember where you and I first met on that journey?
So I've narrowed it down to 2 possibilities.
Okay. All right.
It was either the Together SC Summit in Spartanburg, 2016-17, or the same event in Hilton Head.
Yeah.
When you were on the board, Madeline McGee was the executive director at the time, and she is one of those people that thinks everyone she knows also knows everyone else she knows.
Yeah.
So she had assumed we had met, and we had to do something on the stage or at the microphone like super quick.
Yeah.
I don't even remember really what it was. And then once we had like a 3-minute conversation, I was like, I think I've known this man my entire life.
Now you're exactly right about that. And these conversations have been interesting. As you probably know, I ask everybody this question.
Yeah.
And sometimes I know the answer and sometimes I've forgotten the answer, but you just reminded me that was Hilton Head.
Okay.
That experience. And by the way, shout out to our mutual friend Madeline on her retirement and all the wonderful things. So jealous is right. But that sounds right. So that's, 7, 8-ish years ago, something like that. And then we have been, at least in the sort of 180 Place, 1000 Feathers, like formal contractual space, going on 5-ish years now.
6 or 7. Yeah. It was a little bit before COVID.
Okay, a little before COVID. Yeah, all of that time sort of mashes together, but there was some pre-COVID work.
Yes.
Or at least a little bit of pre-COVID work. So that's about how far back that goes. Give everybody the sort of 180 Place elevator pitch. Who is the organization? What do you do?
So we end and prevent homelessness. Easy to say, not easy to do.
Yeah.
Over 40 years, as many organizations that started up in the 80s, we've really evolved and fine-tuned what we do, how we do it, and gotten super focused on outcomes. And, housing is really the only solution to homelessness. And it took us probably about 30 of those 40 years to arrive at that conclusion and to really give ourselves permission to just let everything else that doesn't end housing that might be nice things to do sort of fall by the wayside or leave those things to others. So it's been a long, interesting journey. I've been here for 20 of those 40 years.
Yeah, yeah.
So a lot of what has happened in recent history is really, still fortunately or unfortunately in my brain.
I have learned 98.7, rough estimate, percent of what I know about this issue from you and from
Oh,
your team. But we, continue to learn and grow together, which has been really fun. But boy, you and your whole team are just top notch and real experts in this conversation. And I enjoy working and learning from you. Stacey, I wonder though, Chamber of Commerce in your history,
mhm.
Director of Advancement, that was at a private school or charter school,
Yeah, Full
something of
Church
the
School.
sort. Then to 180 Place, which was, remind me,
Crisis
Crisis
Ministry.
Ministries at the
Yep.
time.
hmm
When did the like light bulb go off for you? Like, oh, this is the thing. Like, I'm gonna be here a while. This is where I was meant to be. Like, is there a moment in time you can remember or recall?
I was at the Chamber of Commerce for about 10 years, and
Yeah,
that we operated, very much a very traditional old school Chamber of Commerce, but we had this 501(c)(3) embedded in it that was
got
focused
it,
on education advocacy.
got
So
it.
that's when I got the nonprofit, because a Chamber of Commerce is technically a nonprofit, but it's really not.
Right, right.
That's when I really came to understand the power of a nonprofit, the
Got it.
flexibility. You can adjust to the changes in the environment. You can take advantage of the federal funding and all of the different funding streams, but you're not bogged down in the bureaucracy like a federally funded or,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
federal organization. So that was when I really started to understand the power of this nonprofit world.
Got
Being
it.
embedded in the Chamber of Commerce really helped me see, and I didn't coin the term, but I've said it for 30 years now, that nonprofit was our tax status. It was not our business plan. And
Right.
so if we were going to be successful, we had to be a healthy business. We had to fund the back of the house, so to speak. Leadership changes at the Chamber of Commerce didn't quite, just be perfectly honest, didn't quite see eye to eye with new leadership. He wasn't going
Sure.
anywhere. So I took that. We talk about my years in the church school as almost a sabbatical year, setting up a fundraising program for an organization that had been around forever that had never really done fundraising.
Got it.
And then I got the call that the homeless shelter at the time, which is really all they were doing,
Right.
needed a new executive director. This 30-something-year-old, still wet behind the ears, kind of took on a challenge.
Yeah.
And during that process, I think where I got the bug was knowing that nonprofits can actually have huge impact, but in order to do so, you need to run like a business, so to
Yeah.
speak. The organization at the time was really struggling, had not been run like a business, had been run
Right.
like an organization that just wanted to help people, which there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. So I
There's
think
nothing
it was,
wrong with that.
yeah,
And there's a
it was
lot of
kind of,
those in the sector, right? I mean,
yeah. It was in the sort of that first year where I took it on as I didn't know anything about homelessness. I was a tourism major in college.
wow.
Turns out a homeless shelter is a lot like a large hotel and a large
Oh,
restaurant.
interesting. Yeah,
So there
sure.
was some formal education helped, but by and large it was all on the job training.
So it dawns on me here that we've got a lot to get to. You know that the name of the show is 1000 Seconds.
Yep.
I'm getting the little birdie in my ear telling me it's time to start the clock. But the challenge ahead of us here is 40 years of organizational history, 20 years of your path as the CEO of this organization, and an issue as complex as homelessness and affordable housing. And we've got to do all of that in 1000 seconds. So hopefully you're up to it.
Welcome to 1000 Seconds, a video series presented by 1000 Feathers and hosted by the firm's co-founder and president, Forrest Alton. In this first season, Forrest sits down with changemakers, leaders, and visionaries who are doing transformative work at the local, state, and national level. This series will give you a unique view and front row seat to bold and courageous conversations with people that Forrest has learned from and worked with along the way. So set your timers, 1000 Seconds starts now.
All right, so let's jump in. We've got a lot to get to. Let me start with this. Again, we've said a couple times, but 180 Place just turned 40. That's amazing. You referenced in the intro, right? Like just an organization that came up out of the ground to help people quite literally 40 years ago. We see a lot of nonprofits in that space in the 80s-ish. Not all of them, frankly, make it through the first 40 years, as it were. But you did, and the organization did. You and I have a shared experience in this way, whether we've talked about it or not, that I spent 15 or 16 years at a single nonprofit.
Mhm.
And, you know, if you look at my resume, your resume, you see one line, right? The reality, though, is, at least in my experience, I was a part of four or maybe five distinctly different organizations over that 15 years. I trust that resonates with you. And if you look back over, you know, the organization's 40 years, but even you're 20,
Yeah.
I would imagine there are some points in time where like the organization really fundamentally changed.
Really, in the 20 years that I've been here, we've been about four different organizations.
Okay.
And so as I was preparing for our chat today, and as I've been doing, as we've celebrated 40 years of the organization, my 20th
Yeah.
anniversary,
These
it
big years
really,
cause some reflection, right?
exactly. It's not Jane Fonda. I'm not ready to write my memoir yet, but the first 5 years were distinct in that the organization needed to be stabilized. And so,
Mm.
what do you do to reintroduce the organization to the community, re-engage with donors, get the organization on the right path financially?
These
So
are
we
the
were
first, your first 5 years, not
my
the
first
first
five
five
years,
of the,
not
yeah, got it,
right.
got it,
For my first 5 years here
got it.
had just sort of suffered from well-intended people, went
Yeah.
through, we had one executive director for 10 years, had five executive directors over the next 10
Oh,
years.
wow. Yeah.
And now, so there were people literally coming to the job and leaving 2 or 3 days later or 2 or 3 months later. So we
Wow.
had to get the organization stable. And I will tell you, coming from the Chamber of Commerce world, I had people, mentors, people who I'd looked up to over the course of that first part of my career tell me I was crazy for taking this on.
Interesting. Yeah.
So earlier, when you said what was the light bulb that went off for you, it was a little bit of fear because I had bills to pay. I needed a
Yeah.
job, but
Yeah.
also the best way to motivate me is to tell me I can't do something. And so when people were telling me I was crazy, what does this child from the Chamber of Commerce know about homelessness? I didn't know anything about homelessness, but I knew how to run a nonprofit.
Yeah.
So that's what the organization needed in that first 5 years. And so the next series of 5 years were very distinct in, we went from getting stable to really owning our space in the homeless sector again, launching a capital campaign and changing a name. So that was about at my 10-year mark, we changed the name. That's what turned this organization really around, moving away
Yeah.
from this 1980s type name, Charleston Interfaith Crisis Ministry, that got shortened to Crisis Ministries, to 180 Place.
What year was
Um,
that?
that was 2013, 2014, kind
Okay.
of spanned
Okay.
2 years. So we changed our name and moved into a new building. So we really became a different organization visually. Our core mission was the same, our core values were the same, but the way we represented the issue in the community became
Yeah.
different. We
Yeah.
were in a building that didn't look like a homeless organization. So that first 5 years getting stable and then really living with that and then being stable enough to take a leap into a new name
Mm-hmm.
and a new building was kind of how that first 10 years for me here really launched us to where when you started coming on the scene and we really could get more strategic.
A part of our sort of background, or maybe our what makes us tick, that I didn't know we shared so much, was this like, tell me I can't do something.
Mhm.
We are in the midst of an experience right now with a client in North Carolina that I won't name in the moment, but you'll hear more about it over time. Massive project, statewide systems change thing. And in our very first conversation with them to sort of explore the possibility, they said, you know, we just talked to another consultant recently. Well, first they told us about the project, and I said, you know, I don't know if that's for us or not. And the conversation continued, and they said, we just talked to another consultant who told us this is mission impossible. It can't be done. And I said, wait, I'm sorry, what? Now you have my attention. Like
Yep.
what? Now I'm ready. Like, let's start this conversation over. Like I'm ready to go now.
I didn't know this until really in the last 10 years, as you get older and wiser and trying to look back on things. And I thrive on change
Yeah,
in certain aspects of my life.
sure.
Rearranging the kitchen, not so much, but launching new programs, eliminating programs,
Yeah,
which I think
yeah.
in our line of work, a lot of my colleagues are hesitant to do.
Much less common. Sure.
but being able to, but you have to be in a stable organization with a good board and a good staff. You mentioned our team, the team that we've built here. My partners in crime in this work love change as well. I mean, we sort of wake up
Mm.
to say, what's next?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes maybe to our detriment, but most of the time the risk has been calculated and the reward has been worth it.
Speaking of change, when you think about this sort of journey, right? I mean, you outline some of the important moments and points in time, but if you just zoom out a bit and think about the sector or the community or even this issue,
Mhm.
any sort of big changes or trends that stick out in your mind as like, wow, this is a lot different than it was 20 years ago for this particular reason?
I think the realization in the homeless sector is that, and it sounds so obvious, but it wasn't always obvious, that housing is really the only answer,
Yeah.
and that we spent probably the 80s and the 90s trying to fix people.
Yeah.
You got to be sober first, or you need to have your health under control, or you need to have your mental health addressed, and then you earn housing. And I
Yeah.
think as a sector, I hate to use the word industry, but as the homeless world and the housing service provider industry across this country recognize that no one is fixed.
Right.
We all know people who suffer with mental illness, but they haven't
Yeah.
had to sacrifice their housing as a result. We all know
Mhm.
people who use substances in a way that they shouldn't, either, a true substance use problem or maybe just a social drinker kind of thing, but you don't sacrifice your housing. In the late 90s, early 2000s, the best practices became around, let's get people housed and stable and then help them decide what they want to work on. If you want to work on your mental health or your sobriety, you can do that if you're housed. It's harder to
Yeah.
do that in a shelter with 100 other guys or 25 other women. That was pivotal change. And I think it also drove us to be much more focused on outcomes.
Got it.
Not just us as 180 Place, but homeless providers, service providers across the country, really focusing on housing as an outcome.
Got it.
Because you can't ever fix somebody. What's your
Yeah, yeah.
outcome?
I will admit, and I mentioned this earlier, like I was ignorant to all of the nuances and details of this conversation before we connected, right? And not when connected as in met, but connected as in started working together. Most people listening, sort of at a basic level, understand sort of why this issue matters. What they might not understand, although you're starting to hear and see a lot more conversation about this, right? And this is not a Charleston thing. In
Right.
any community in South Carolina, any community in the country that we show up in, this is a topic that is top of mind for people. You know, 180 Place has a vision that everyone has a home. Seems like we're a long way from that. I mean, why are we so far away from everyone having a home? Like, why can't that just be a thing?
I mean, I don't think it's a lack of resources. I do
Yeah.
think it boils down to, and this again, oversimplifying things, a lack of political will, big P, little p. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
there are still people who believe that homelessness is a choice and that people have done things to deserve that. Therefore, if I just give them a home, that's a handout. And what about the people who worked hard and pulled themselves up by their bootstraps? And then I also think that, particularly in a community like Charleston that is so heavily focused and reliant on tourism, as a thing that runs our economy, as an engine in our economy, but also the jobs that the hospitality industry creates do not provide the wages that people need to afford housing. Is it
Yeah.
that cost of housing or is it the wages? Or is it both? And as you said, no community in the country will tell you they have enough affordable housing, or there may be a
Right.
handful that say they have enough housing. And then how do you make that housing affordable for people? And so until we can accept the fact that everyone deserves a home, we will probably always have people falling into homelessness. Recognize that homelessness isn't a character flaw or a choice. It
Yeah.
is the result of, in my opinion, low wages and lack of affordable housing. It's that simple. And so sometimes when it's that simple, it's that much harder to tackle because I need to believe it's your fault if you're homeless. It's not my fault. It's not society's fault.
Really
It's your fault.
interesting. I hadn't thought about that sort of inverse relationship between, complexity and willingness, as it were, right? I mean, it's an issue we all love to talk about, the proverbial we all love
Right.
to talk about, but nobody really wants to, turn over the right solutions in some way.
Right.
It
Because the solution is simple, but this
Yeah.
simple, was it Confucius said, the simple is not always easy.
Again, one of the things that I just love about working with you, whether it's this, I love to take on a challenge or change or whatever it is, but the way I see it as a friend and a colleague now is that Stacey's never satisfied with the status quo, and leader to leader, friend to friend, I mean that as like the highest compliment I can give, right? There's always a what's next, what now, where are we going from here, and a willingness to take on some big challenges. So this affordable housing conversation takes some little p, big P political will. It takes some innovation. It takes some resource development. It also takes a willingness to lean in and be part of the solution.
Yeah.
It's not lost on me that just over your right shoulder, I think, is a hard hat and an image.
Yep.
573 Meeting Street. I mean, I think if we listen close, we might be able to hear bulldozers and heavy
Yep. The
machinery
beeping
out your
right out the
window.
window. Mhm.
For those people who aren't, reading the Post and Courier, aren't in Charleston, tell us about 573 Meeting Street. What are you doing? What's happening? What's the status?
This is a put your money where your mouth is moment for 180 Place. If housing is the only solution to homelessness, why aren't we playing more of a role in the housing conversation,
Yeah.
beyond conversation? So 573 Meeting will be built as an apartment building that is being built on what was the original shelter for this organization,
Oh,
which
wow.
is super cool. In Charleston, we love history.
Yeah.
And so that address, 573 Meeting Street, has been associated with homeless people and helping people change their
Wow.
life for 40 years.
I didn't know that
Um,
part of the story. That just
yeah,
gave me goosebumps. That's
it's
really
pretty cool.
cool.
It's
Yeah.
pretty cool. If housing is the only answer to homelessness, 180 Place is now playing a role in creating 70 apartments specifically for people moving out of homelessness. So these will be affordable at the lowest of income levels, and you have to be homeless before you move in. We're not an affordable housing developer, but we are
Mm.
an ending homelessness
Yeah,
organization.
sure,
And
sure.
so this takes our work literally from the street, where we are doing, intense street-based case management and outreach through the shelter. You don't have to come through the shelter to earn housing, but into the housing arena, housing with supportive services that we know helps people who have been homeless stay housed long term. It is been a labor of love for a long time, lots of stops and starts.
Yeah.
This community has really embraced this project in a way that we hope will be a model for others to follow. And it is, yeah, it's that next step for us. It really is taking our mission around ending and preventing homelessness to we are in control of 70 units of housing to be able to support those who are most vulnerable. Probably second only to the name change, which might make it sound, the name change was pivotal for us for a lot of
Right.
reasons.
Right.
But this is setting us up for the next phase, for the next 20 years, 40 years, 50 years.
It's so cool. I'm so proud, so excited, so happy, so all the emotions. It deserves its own 1000 seconds episode because what I know about this journey over the last whoosh 5+ years
Yeah.
or more is there were plenty of times that you or your board or your donors could have pushed back from the table and walked away. There
Yeah.
were plenty of opportunities for you to throw up your hands and say, it's too hard, it costs too much, it's COVID, it's building supplies, it's delays, it's all of these things.
Right.
And you never did. That is so important.
I think one of the things I've learned with you in particular, and as you helped us with a couple of iterations of our strategic plan and really fine tuning our vision and our mission, not just our mission statement, but our mission and establishing our values, is that clarity of purpose.
Mm.
And so if we're about ending homelessness, we can't give up, because if we give up on providing housing for homeless people, I'm getting all the clip now. I'm getting a little, how can we
Yeah.
expect others to step into the space and
Yeah.
provide housing to end homelessness? So this really is the next iteration for us. And of course, everybody around us is going, okay, what's next? What's
Yeah,
next?
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. Meanwhile, we're like, we're just clearing the site here. Let's give us a
Yeah, a
minute.
foundation is going down. Yeah, I mean, let's get people in there first. And I know myself well enough to know, and now know this organization well enough to know there will be a what's next. I don't know what that will be. I
Yeah.
don't know what it is. I suspect it will be more in the housing space. Because again, I sound like a broken record, whether it's an interview with you or an interview with a TV reporter, housing is the only solution. So we've got to stay focused on housing as the way to end homelessness.
I will also just sort of chime in on a little piece of the what's next. I mean, it might not be 573 Meeting Street big, but what's next also is a continued evolution and expansion. Maybe expansion is not the right word, but
Yeah.
of focusing on very specific populations, right? A very intentional focus. And one of the things that you and I are now linked arm in arm on here as a next step is tackling youth and young adult homelessness, this 18 to 24 population. We've got just a minute or two left, but
Yeah.
why does that population matter? Why has that emerged as something new and interesting to tackle?
It's an obvious for us as we're seeing that population grow, the 18 to 24-year-olds. It is a population that is very well hidden, as we've learned together through this process. When we talk to homeless youth, they are chameleons, and so they really do hide. And it is also that if we're going, we like to talk about ending generational poverty or ending generational, pick your thing. If we really are going to make a dent, we've got to go upstream. And so really
Yeah.
looking at the 18 to 24-year-olds, those who are at risk, this is unique to this project as well, or this programming, is we can really focus more on those who are at risk. So that upstream thinking, rather than waiting until someone falls into homelessness to help them, it's the right thing to do. I mean, we talk about a vulnerable population, people
Yeah.
aging out of foster care, people who've never had a stable family, who have not had the benefits that you and I had growing up with parents who really helped us learn how to be an adult and learn how to function independently. So it really is kind of that, if we're going to tackle this on a generational level, how can we really intervene at a critical stage in young people's development, in that 18 to 24-year-old age range? And it's been a challenge, I'm not going to lie, of pulling together providers who've worked, as we all know, in the nonprofit sector, we're guilty of talking about collaboration and then going off and doing our own thing. You've been a huge integral part of really helping us get past the talk and really start collaborating and have honest conversations with each other. And that's what's super exciting, is a new level of engagement and collaboration around a very specific population that needs great help, where we know we can have some phenomenal outcomes. I just know it's going to be amazing.
Well, it's kind of you to say. I mean, we have a very small role to play in this, but it is. I have this sense too that there are just big things coming on this conversation and its intersection with everything else you're doing and working on. Just really, really cool. As we wrap up here, just one last thing. Another special part about 180 Place is that you do offer plenty of opportunities for people to get involved or learn more. I'm listening to the episode. I don't know as much about you as I might like. How do I get more involved? Where do I go? Website shout outs, that sort of thing.
Sure. 180place.org. You can take a virtual tour. You can donate. Of course, I could not disappoint my development staff if
we can't go through an episode without mentioning that opportunity.
I know, it's what we do, regardless of the time of year. Financial support is key, but learning more, we have a lot of links on there too for people that are interested in the issue, interested in learning more about the challenges of homelessness, but also, more importantly, the solutions. And then there's a volunteer tab. So volunteering, whether it's, helping us stock the pantry, in addition to our housing work, we are operating still a nightly shelter and a community feeding program. So hundreds of meals a day are being served out of our kitchen. So just a super fun, energizing way to volunteer.
Go visit the website, learn more, get involved with these folks, especially if you're in Charleston or the Low Country.
You can sign up for an info tour.
Oh,
and
fun.
those info tour in the not too distant future, those info tours are going to also include hard hat tours. So,
sign me up. I'm here.
Got a little Bob the Builder moment in you. You can
I love it.
put on a hard hat and a safety vest and walk out on the site.
I am not supposed to have favorite clients, so I will say it this way. Stacey and her team are some of the most thoughtful, insightful, innovative, but also just coolest and fun people that we work with of anyone across the country. Stacey, thanks for everything you do, and thanks for joining us today. I know that we'll see each other soon.
Yes, thank you for having me. True honor. Thank you, Forrest.